Okay, all right. So, welcome everyone. So good to be together again for the last class today, right? For Vayikra, a guide to relationships with Miss Rachael Gelfman Schultz. Welcome everyone, including those who are watching us live on Facebook. Um, just a couple words. I will send an invitation to become a panelist. That would allow you to unmute if you'd like to ask questions or make comments. Please stay muted when you're not actively speaking. We would love to see your face if you're able and willing to turn on your video, no problem if not. And if you'd like to participate in writing, you can write a chat here on Zoom or make a comment on Facebook. And with that, I'll just turn it to you, Rachael.
Okay, thanks, Evie. So today's our last class, so I wanted to choose a topic that will sum up everything, or a lot of things. So we are going to talk today about the Kadoshim Tihiyu, you shall be holy, and what does it mean to be holy? And we'll see that sometimes they call it the holiness codes. Following the commandment that says you shall be holy, there's a number of famous commandments or rules, including love your neighbor as yourself. I think is the most famous, and some others which are much less famous. So we'll talk about why are those rules chosen as sort of the illustration of what does it mean to be holy, and how does the choice of those rules help us understand better what does it mean to be holy? What does it mean to actively be holy? You shall be holy. So before we start, though, I wanted to just connect back to last week's class. There was a midrash that I didn't get to that my father had unknowingly alluded to. Comparing the angels and people and saying why was Torah given to people? So I wanted to look at that because I think it's a good sort of segue between last week's class and this week's class, and then we'll start to talk about the holiness. I mean, this is also about holiness, so. Okay. Dad, do you want to read it since it was your comment? Do you see it okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I've got the handout. When the Lord came to give the Torah to Israel, the angels began to argue and said before him, "What is man that you should remember him?" And they said before him, "Let your Torah be given in the heavens, for we are holy and your Torah is holy. We are pure, your Torah is pure. We are living and your Torah is life." He said to them, "It is not fitting to be upheld in you. The Holy One, blessed be he," said to the angels, "the Torah cannot be fulfilled among you, for there is no procreation, death, impurity, or illness among you. Rather, you are all holy. And it is written in the Torah, this is the law of a man who dies in a tent. This shall be the law of the leper. When a woman at birth, and if a woman has a discharge and so on, these shall you eat, and all of these things are not among you." Those quotes being mostly from Vayikra, but not
exactly. Right, almost all, right? So this midrash is a good midrash to talk about what is the larger meaning of Vayikra. So what is God saying here? Why was the Torah given to people and not angels? I mean, what? Someone
I can start. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Donna.
There's nothing that angels need to improve on.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll talk about that, right? Like angels don't improve. People do, and the Torah is all about improving, for sure, right? The Torah is about process, and we'll come back to this at the very end of class. But And even you shall be holy, like that's what we'll come back to at the end of the class. It's a process, it's improving, and that's only human beings can do that. Anything else any other comments anyone got out of this in terms of why the Torah is given to people? Meaning, what do all these things have in common? Procreation, death, impurity, illness, the man who dies in the tent. Yeah.
The circumstance, I mean, the troubles, if you will, of life, the problems that one encounters while living a human life.
Exactly. These are things that are very connected to humanity, to what it means to live a human life, and what it means also to be, I would add, to be in a body, right? All these things, death, illness, I mean, angels don't have them because they're not, sickness, right? All these things, childbirth that we talked about, that's the chapter 15 that we looked at more closely. A woman has a discharge. All these things are about the body, right? And about the human experience. So if you remember, at the end of last class, we ended by looking at Rachael Hochstein's explanation of what Aaron was trying to say to Moses. And she said that Aaron's basic message was like, what does it mean to sanctify God, right? When there was that verse in the beginning of the chapter with Nadav and Avihu, and Moses said, God is sanctified by those closest to him. What does it mean to be sanctified by God? That Aaron's saying that to be sanctified by God means to come close to God with like the full human experience and our full range of human emotions. And I would add also our full range of physical, all the different of physicality, and weakness and illness and death and birth, all these things that the angels don't have. So that's in the background of this class, and I think very relevant. I'm going to stop sharing for a second because we can. So I want to start by just asking the question before we begin to look in the verses. How would you define kadosh or holy? If you were to define it, what would you, or to be holy? What words would come to mind? Associations. Also, think about where we see the word holy in what context. That can also help in the Bible. It's not in the Torah. We'll stick to the Torah. Yeah, Donna.
Perfect.
Interesting. Okay. Where do you get that?
Well, everyone in the Torah is basically a lot of imperfect people. In fact, I don't know who is perfect. And so we can relate to their imperfections because we all have imperfections. So
right. Coming back to what you were saying about the process, right? Okay. But then, so you're saying holy is like the perfect ideal to which we're striving, but we can't ever get to, basically. Okay. All right. Anyone else? Even thinking about, I don't know if anyone is familiar with the Hebrew, like what the etymology is. Yeah, Susan.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm, influenced by whatever I learned and read about it, but kadosh seems to me makes sense. That means separate yourself, exactly. like that. I'm kadosh. It's not like you're better. You're just different. It's not better.
Exactly. I think that's like the most straightforward meaning dictionary definition, as it were. We'll see actually when I share my screen. The Jastrow defines holy, separate, right? And that's for sure. I mean, we'll talk about not going beyond that as well, but I think that's the basic, dictionary definition. So being a holy nation, right, would be a separate nation, right? That's what you're saying. And where else, what other context do we see holy besides a holy nation?
Well, it's all in Parshat Kedoshim, which I guess is where we're going. But
Right.
sort of like whatever you're supposed to be doing, you're supposed to be doing to be kadosh. Kind of thing. Like maybe one of the goals of the mitzvot is kedoshim to you. Like it's in Parshat Kedoshim, but in general, and there are all these mixed up mitzvot there. Keeping, honoring your parents.
Exactly. That's exactly where we're going. Yep. All the mixed up mitzvot. Anywhere else that people can think of besides that we see holy? Like what else in Judaism is holy besides people? Yeah, Miriam.
We have God is holy, ki kadosh ani, right?
Right. Ultimately, why are we trying to be holy? Because God is holy and we're emulating whatever we can about God, definitely. Anything?
I mean, there's also Zman, Kedushat Makom, like there's other things that are holy. Right. Doing things, there's places that are holy and times that are holy. And
exactly, right? So Shabbat, so times that are, and we're going to get to this all later, but just to like get all the ideas out there first. Right, times that are holy, Shabbat, the holidays, right? And places that are holy, such as, the tabernacle, in the time that we're at now in the desert, later on in the temple. So those are like the three main categories, right? The holiness of people, place, time. Yeah, what, Susan?
Holy books are very popular.
Holy books, that's true also. Yeah, yes. So those are like three main categories, and all of them you could use the definition that Susan said to begin with. The straightforward definition that they're separate. In other words, Shabbat is separate from the rest of the week. The temple or the tabernacle is separate from the rest of all the other places. But I want to also go beyond that. Okay, so let's look at our main text for the day. Okay, who would like to read? Susan, you want to read since you're already started with this? You mind?
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. You should each revere your father and mother and keep my Sabbaths. I, the Lord, am your God. Do not turn to idols or make what? Gotta scroll over there, Rachel?
Yes, sorry. Keep scrolling down.
Do not turn to idols and make molten gods for yourself. I, the Lord, am your God. Yeah. When you sacrifice an offering of well-being to the Lord, sacrifice it so it may be accepted on your behalf. It shall be eaten on the day you sacrifice it, or on the day following, but what is left on the third day must be consumed in fire. If it should be eaten on the third day, it's an offensive thing, it will not be acceptable. And one who eats of it shall bear the guilt for having profaned what is sacred to the Lord. That person shall be cut off from kin. When you reap the harvest of your land, you should not reap all the way to the edges of the field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You should not pick your vineyard bare or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You should leave them for the poor and the stranger. I, the Lord, am your God. You shall not steal. You should not deal deceitfully or falsely with one another. You should not swear falsely by my name, profaning the name of your God. I am the Lord. You shall not defraud your fellow Israelite. You should not commit robbery. The wages of a laborer should not remain with you until morning. You should not insult the deaf or place a stumbling block in front of the blind. You shall fear the Lord your God. I am the Lord. You shall not render an unfair decision. You do not favor the poor or show deference to the rich. Judge your kinfolk fairly. Do not deal basely with members of your people. Do not profit by the blood of your fellow Israelite. I am the Lord. You shall not hate your kinfolk in your heart. Reprove your kin, but incur no guilt on their account. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against members of your people. Love your fellow as yourself. I am the Lord. You shall observe my laws. You should not let your cattle mate with different kind. You should not sow your field with two kinds of seed. You should not put on a cloth from a mixture of two kinds of material. If a man has carnal relations with a woman who is a slave and has been designated for another man, but has not been redeemed or given her freedom, there shall be an indemnity. They shall not, however, be put to death, since she has not been freed. But he must bring an to the entrance of the tent of meeting as his guilt offering to the Lord, a ram of guilt offering. With the ram of guilt offering, the priest shall make expiation for him before the Lord for the sin he committed, and the sin he committed will be forgiven him.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, that ended up being, that was quite a long reading. So
Keeps me
yeah, you managed it. Okay, so there are a lot of different rules here, and it seems like somewhat of a random collection of rules. The reason that I stopped there is because that's what we talked about this in a different class, right? That the Torah itself, the Sefer Torah has what they call parshiot, right? That there's spaces in the Torah so we can see what, like this is a paragraph basically. So we know it all has the same topic, starting from the opening, speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. And then ending with the carnal relations with the slave. So it's a very wide range of laws. I'm going to go under the assumption that, that the main, topic, the title is basically you shall be holy, that all of these laws in some ways fall under this title of you shall be holy. So does anyone like looking at all these different laws, some interpersonal, some agricultural, there's really some about the sacrifices, it's really a very wide range. Does anyone have any like working theories of what they're all doing here together under the title of you shall be holy? Or any working theories that works for some of them and then wondering why a few don't work? Any ideas that you want to throw out there? Yeah, Maureen.
So to me, what these laws mostly have in common, I'd have to spend more time thinking about it, but off the top of my head, is that these are things that make the world better, make you a better person and make the world a better place. That the way God intended the world was that that everything should work, like the environment should work and the way people deal with each other should work, and the way a laborer and a boss interact with each other should work. That there was that the conception of this world that God created was that things should be good. I mean, God says that, right? It was good,
right?
And
So
all of these things, maybe, or a lot of them, it seems like make things better world.
Right. I think that is a very good summary of almost all of them, but there are a few puzzling ones. Like definitely that's like the gist of things, right? Is like making things a better world. How do we make things a better world? Helping people who are poor, making sure to protect the rights of a laborer who's someone, who you think of more as probably like a day laborer, like someone who's pretty low on the socioeconomic chain. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's the most famous one. Not hating your kinsfolk. Like all these things, like you said, seem to be about making the world a better place. There are a few that are a little bit more difficult. Like where is it? Like Shatnez is in here somewhere. You shall not you shall not put on cloth from a mixture of two kinds of material. Oh, okay, I don't know about that one. That one's a little more challenging. And you shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed. Also, the very beginning is puzzling. The sacrifice of the offering of the well-being. Sacrifices that you have to eat it on that day or the day following. But if it's left over on the third day, you can't eat it anymore. And if you eat it, it's an offensive thing and you're cut off, which is a very, big karet. That's a very big punishment. Donna, you want to add to that?
Well, as I want to do in my Talmud class, I like to get a little off topic, and you can ignore this, but it occurred to me that animals other than humans and plants are already holy because they do what they're, what has been installed in their beings. And so is it possible that God doesn't have to tell them what to do because they are holy? Or is it just that God doesn't think about animals and plants, in fact, has human beings actually sacrifice them and do other bad things to them?
Sure, right. It's interesting. So definitely animals and plants cannot, become holy, right? They can't have this, like we were talking about before, this process, right? Only human beings really have this process of improving and becoming more like God. In the Torah, animals and plants are normally like instruments of people in the sense that like a person can make an animal holy by saying, I'm going to now sacrifice it, or also a plant, right? We also sacrifice plants. I'm going to sacrifice it. I'm going to sacrifice it to God, and then it makes it holy. But yeah, it's an interesting point. Ita, did you also have something to say earlier? I thought you were. Yes, no. Okay.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Great. I missed the beginning of the test, but the law about having kind of forbidden relations with a slave woman. Yes. Did I understand that it said you could go and make an offering and then he'd be forgiven, right? Was that the whole quote?
Yes.
The guilt offering.
Right, he brings the guilt.
But I thought that he had to actually marry her or kind of take her on as a wife, or is that from somewhere else?
Yeah, you're thinking of like in a war, if he, like a prisoner of war. So you're
a prisoner of war.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
So
I guess
if
this
it's with a
slave, yeah.
If it's with a slave, then he's just forgiven after offering sacrifice. So for me, that jumped out as what? What is this doing?
What's going on here?
You can just make do this, and you're forgiven by taking the offering. So that I was wondering where that came from. Like where is this collection of halachot from? Where they listed like this?
Put together. Yeah. I mean, we're not going to go. It's a very good question about this halacha about the man who has sex with the slave. We're not really going to go into it. It's a very good question. But we will try to think about it also in the larger context of this passage. Like, what is it doing here? That's,
Yeah. What is it doing here?
Yeah, it's a good question.
It seems very different from the others.
It definitely does. Yes, I would.
So
yes, for sure.
It's very much like a serial transgression,
Mm-hmm. What? Serious? Is that what you said?
It's a serious transgression, and it seems like it's so easily absolvable by bringing it guilt offering.
Offering enough, right? So that question we're not going to get to, but the question, which is a great question, but the question of like, why does it belong here? We'll think about that. Anyone else want to add anything about this collection before we go on?
Well, I just wanted to say about the slave. I mean, to modern sensibilities, that sounds like a horrible thing, but it seems like in this context, they're really talking about this woman as property, and that you have somehow usurped somebody's property, and therefore you have to make a payment to them. Mm-hmm. So in that case, it seems like it has to do with some level, I mean, not to the woman, obviously, but to whoever owns the person, some level of fairness in business, maybe, or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, all of these things obviously have to be taken in their time, that it was a society where slavery was allowed. And the Torah also allows slavery, but the Torah hopefully, gives rules to make slavery better than what it was in the surrounding societies, even though for us it's still very hard to understand that there's that, that it's allowed at all. Okay, but but we're going to put aside that question for a second. Okay, so we're going to now go into this question, what does it mean to be holy? So the Jastro says exactly what Susan said, to be cut off, to be separated. By the way, the same word kadesh is also used for a prostitute, we see elsewhere, because a prostitute, I mean, that's like separate in a totally not good way, right? She's like, in her own place, like sort of separated from the community. And then it also means to become pure, sacred, holy. So Sifra, the Midrash says, building on this understanding of holy, just says, you should be holy means to separate yourself. And that's it. They don't explain what does it mean to separate yourselves. The classic understandings of what does it mean you shall be holy that people generally learn are Rashi and Ramban. Before we get to that, also just the beginning of the Rashi is very interesting, that Rashi says, speak to all the congregation of the children of Israel. The addition of the world's the congregation, teaches that this section was proclaimed in full assembly because most of the fundamental teachings of the Torah are dependent on it. In other words, they're contained in it, right? That some way or other, these laws like encapsulate all like important things in Judaism, basically, Rashi's saying, which is very interesting. We're not going to look at it, but there are commentators that say that basically all of the 10 commandments are reflected in one way or another in all of these laws, like honor your parents and honor the Sabbath and I'm the Lord your God, meaning in one way or another. We talk about stealing somewhere, another, they like, make the connection. So in other words, that all of these are like the fundamental laws of Judaism. Okay. So what does it mean to be separate? So Rashi and Ramban offer two possible understandings. Does someone want to read Rashi? This means, so Rashi and Ramban being the medieval commentators. Anyone?
Yeah, I'll read.
You can read Rashi and Ramban, Maureen, once you add it. Okay.
This means separate from the forbidden sexual relations just mentioned and from sinful thoughts. Wherever you find in the Torah a command to fence yourself in against such relations, you also find mention of holiness.
Okay, so what's important to say here is what Rashi is doing, and Ramban also to a certain extent, is they are connecting you shall be holy, not to this paragraph that we just read, but to the previous parsha, which is about sexual transgressions. So Rashi's saying, which is the previous parsha. Also, it's not the same. Kedoshim. Our parsha starts with Kedoshim. So we're separating from forbidden sexual relations and from sin in general. And here it says sinful thoughts. The Hebrew is avera, so it might not be just sinful thoughts, but separating from forbidden relations and from sinful thoughts. Okay, so that's Rashi. Ramban has a bit of a different version. This is a very famous Ramban. I'm sure some people have read it before. So Maureen, you want to read? This is a abridged version of Ramban, since we're not going to end up going in this direction, but we need to, but this is the classic, one of the classic understandings of what does it mean you shall be holy. You want to go ahead, Maureen?
And the matter is that the Torah prohibited sexual transgressions and forbidden foods, and permitted sexual relations between husband and wife, and the eating of meat and the drinking of wine. If so, a desirous person will find a place to be lecherous with his wife, or his many wives, or to be among the guzzlers of wine, the gluttons of meat. This is reassuring. He will I'm just going to go be a glutton. Okay. He will speak as he pleases about all the vulgarities, the prohibition of which is not mentioned in the Torah. And behold, he would be a scoundrel with the permission of the Torah. Therefore, scripture came after it specified the prohibitions that it completely forbade and commanded a more general rule that we should be separated from indulgence of those things that are permissible. He should minimize sexual relations, and he should sanctify himself from wine by minimizing it. And so too, he should separate himself from impurity. And he should also guard his mouth and his tongue from becoming defiled from the multitude of coarse food and from disgusting speech. And this is the way of the Torah, to state the particulars and then the general rules. So in other words, we're not supposed to become guzzlers of wine and gluttons of meat and lecherous with our spouse. Well, that's an appointment. Okay.
Sorry. Yep. So, right. In other words, if you just went according to the letter of the law, you could do all these things, right? You could, right, become guzzlers of wine, et cetera, right? It's not forbidden by the letter of the law. So the Torah can only give us, but like we can never cover everything by specific laws. So the Torah gives us these more general principles to guide our behavior, right? So after giving all these very specific prohibitions of sexual transgressions and other things, the Torah gives us more. So again, he, like Rashi, is connecting to the previous parsha. So after giving these very specific transgressions, the Torah comes along and gives this general principle, and the general guide, and it's like a general principle to guide us what the spirit of the law is, even in cases where we're not covered by the particular rules, which is like something that Ramban says in other places also, how we have like his understanding of the Torah, that we have some sort of general guiding principles that help cover the cases, the situations that aren't covered by all of the many, many specific rules in the Torah. There are still cases that are not covered. And of course, it's also like about separating from physical things, mostly, right? Everything that he's talking about, like minimizing sexual relations, not minimizing our intake of wine, being careful not to eat too much food and not to talk too much disgusting speech. He disagrees with Rashi, but he is still interpreting what it means to be holy as in some way like separating ourselves from physical pleasures, going sort of too extreme on the physical, like separating ourselves from the enjoyment of the world. Yeah. Donna, did you want to say something? Yeah.
Why should I be listening?
Uh-oh, you muted yourself.
Oh, yeah, just press it.
Why should I be listening to this if none of it applies to me as a woman?
Oh, no, it applies to you as a woman, don't worry.
Huh?
But you're saying because you're right. He writes in male speech because he's a man and he like assumes that he's talking to other rabbis, but it applies to women also. In other words, it's like the Torah is not only speaking to men, and he's speaking to men because like that's who was sitting with him in his yeshiva, but he also thinks that women should not do any of these things either. In other words, women should also not drink too much wine and minimize sexual relations with their husbands, et cetera, et cetera.
But getting to have several husbands, is that allowed?
That part's not allowed. Nope.
That
is a difference between men and women. Correct. Yeah. But whatever. In his time and place, that's what they did. They spoke in male. Yeah. Yes.
I've always been very struck by this Naval Schultz Torah. It's like a real thing, that you see people we should know these people. Everybody knows people like this. We're like, let's say, more careful about what goes into their mouth than what comes out of it, just to be, certain people just, behave in disgusting ways. But it's really, they seem to be, whatever. I want to know if the Ramban, if this was like a brave new idea. Do you know when the Ramban presented, like he's saying, like Joshim Tiyu is not about specific mitzvot or even about general mitzvot. It's about like a attitude towards what the Torah is telling you to be or do.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know the answer historically. Like if this was if this was a new idea that he was coming at. I mean, he's certainly the one that we always quote on this idea, but it's an interesting question. And obviously he's basing it on the midrash that we saw originally, the separate yourselves, but the midrash didn't, but so is Rashi. In other words, the midrash didn't explain what does it mean to separate yourself. Yeah, I don't know what his sources are. It's an interesting question, but he's certainly the one that we, he's the classic one that we go to talk about when we're talking about this. And it is a very important message, like you're saying, like you can be so scrupulous about the letter of the law and still be a bad person. Like it can happen. And like that's not, Judaism is not only about the letter of the law. Okay, so these are the two I would say very classical. Yeah, Maureen. Maureen, did you?
Yeah. I don't know how much you want to be pulled off topic, but anyway, probably not at all. Anyway, but I just have to mention the Nazir who denies him or herself wine, and then has to bring a sin offering. And I think it's Rashi who says why the sin offering, and the answer he gives is that because he denied himself something that was pleasurable that he could have had. And I mean, just interesting to me, like it makes me think about, I think it was Ben Franklin, like everything in moderation, right? That sweet spot that it doesn't say here, you shouldn't enjoy your sexual congress with your spouse, or you shouldn't enjoy your wine, or you shouldn't enjoy your food, but you need to find that sweet spot. So I mean, I like that about Judaism, and I also think it's hard. I think humans are hardwired to keep going when they find something that it's never enough money, never enough food, never enough power, never enough.
We get addicted to things also.
So many things.
Yeah, but I think that's exactly. I mean, listen, the question of the Nazirite is a big question, whether the Nazir, the Nazirite is good or bad. Like that's or something in between. It's very complex. It's a very good question. But yeah, I think that's what the Ramban's saying. In other words, we should enjoy physical things. We should enjoy sex. We should enjoy eating. We should enjoy drinking wine. But don't get carried away. Don't become a scoundrel with the permission of Torah and Aval. But we shouldn't be separating ourselves from the physical world in any way, shape, or form. Okay, so that's so Rashi and Ramban are both, like I said, basing themselves on connecting what does it mean to be holy to the previous parsha. But if you look at where the breaks are, it seems that it's really connected to the paragraph that we just read of all this interesting collection of laws, most of, as Maureen, right, you pointed out, are interpersonal. So I think that I want to go of course, the Rashi and Ramban are also, not to reject them, but to take things in a different direction. To build on this, but also take in a different direction. And I wanted to just start off by the idea that this is a friend of mine, Sarah Rudolph, that it's not only, right, we're not only separating from, like we've been talking until now, right, separating from sin, separating from sexual transgressions, separating from drinking too much or eating too much, et cetera, but we're also separating for, right? Like in Judaism, we always talk about separating for. And the classic example of this is kiddushin. This can be seen in one of the Jewish terms for marriage, kiddushin, from the same Hebrew root as the name of this portion. The traditional formula recited under the marriage canopy is Harei at Mikudeshet li, right? Mikudeshet, the same root. Behold, you are sanctified to me. Sanctification here is not simply about separating from other potential partners, but about the designation for a unique relationship with a specified individual. So in other words, yes, we are separating from, but there is also some higher purpose. We are also separating for. So this is like the direction that I want to go in to hopefully explain why, or the question we started off with, which is why is you shall be holy, kadoshim tiyu, connected to all this long list of mitzvot. So I want to look again at my favorite rabbi, Rabbi Nechemia Polin. And he's not talking about specifically this passage, though obviously, I mean, he does, but obviously it's also about this passage, but also about the entire Vayikra, because the whole book is really about what does it mean to be holy, whether the holy place of the tabernacle, also holy the holidays, Shabbat. So someone want to read Rabbi Polin? Anyone? Yeah, Dad? Yeah, go ahead.
I am advancing a convivial reading of Vayikra, attempting to reclaim a book of benevolent openness and passionate, joyous life affirmation. But what then of the key concept of Kedusha, holiness, typically understood as separation, often with a whiff of austere self-deprivation, repressive asceticism, and social isolation. Rather than separation, I believe it is more accurate to think of Kedusha in terms of distinction. Kedusha entails marking of a particular domain, spatial, temporal, and/or social, as distinct, focusing attention in order to positively affect the domain not so marked. This is closely linked with Rachael, blessing, Rachael and Kedusha can be seen as twin aspects of the same process. Kedusha's transformative energy is centripetal, facing inward, while Rachael's faces outward. One could not exist without the other. Kedusha is not estrangement from the world, but engagement with it, the distinctiveness it calls for us to benefit those one serves and blesses. The centripetal impulse is purposive, to clear and activate inner space so as to bestow positive influence. The going inward is in order to emerge empowered to give blessing. We have already encountered this alternation of Kedusha and Rachael in narrative form with the story of the entry of Moshe and Aaron together with into the Ohel Moed. This performative enactment of intimacy and moving to interiority, followed by emergence and facing the community and blessing, is the template for Vayikra as a whole.
Right, so that's what we saw last week, right? Where the Moshe and Aaron went into the Ohel Moed, and we don't know exactly what happened in there, but they did something intimate, private, inside this very holy place. They communed with God, and then they came out, and that moment of holiness enabled them to come out and to bless the people, right? That moment of sort of intense holiness in that place, in that holy, the holiest of places, enabled them to then go outward and bless the people. So I liked how Rabbi Polin talks about Kedusha as not estrangement from the world, but engagement with it. In other words, that holiness is, we set aside these different things as holy, right? We mark them as holy, but in order to positively affect everything that is not marked, as it were, as holy, right? Which also goes back to like what Donna was saying about the process, like holiness has a process. So Menachem Leibtag, meaning he's not building on Rabbi Polin, but sort of in a similar direction, right? Rabbi Polin talked about, he talks about entails marking of a particular domain, spatial, temporal, and or social. So that goes back to what Susan had spoken about, right? That we have on the one hand, Kedushat HaMishkan, of a place, right? Or does someone want to read this from Rabbi Leibtag?
I'll read it.
Yeah.
Kedusha for a purpose. Sefer Vayikra theme Kedusha in the three realms of Makom, Zman, and Adam. Makom. Kedushat HaMishkan, Makom, that's a place. We explained implies that God separates a special place and infuses it with an intense level of holiness in order that it affect and thus elevate the level of the area that surrounds it. In a similar manner, God separated Shabbat, Kedushat Zman, infusing it with an intense level of holiness in order to elevate the spiritual level of the entire week. The same is true of Kedushat Israel, Kedushat Adam. God separated a special nation, infusing it with an intense level of holiness in order to elevate the spiritual level of all nations. God designates Am Yisrael to follow the mitzvot of Kedoshim Tiyu to fulfill this purpose.
Right. So in other words, every time that we set something, we make something distinct and holy, it's really to make everything right around it holy. In other words, we say that the tabernacle is holy. That's a Kedushat HaMishkan, right? But everything, meaning every place has God in it. So what are we doing by saying that a particular place is holy? We're trying to, by saying that that particular place is holy, make all places sort of more holy. Positively affect everything else. By setting aside Shabbat as holy, we're trying to infuse the whole week with some kind of holiness. And same thing with the Jewish people, by setting them aside as holy and by distinct as holy in some way, we're trying to positively affect the whole world, all the nations. So keeping this in mind, how, like going back to our paragraph, how does Rabbi Poland and Rabbi Liebtex are going in a similar direction, this idea that holiness is making something distinct, separating something as distinct in order to sort of positively impact its surroundings? How does that help us understand this sort of interesting, seemingly random collection of laws? I'll go back to it. How does it help us understand like what's going on here and why these laws are good examples of what it means to be holy?
Well, I think a lot of them are about things that nobody's going to find out whether you did it or not. Like the standing back in front of the blind is like the classic, but a lot of them are kind of nobody's watching you kind of thing. Did you finish eating all of your shlamim? Did you it was like there's like hundreds of families there having sacrifices. Anybody watching to see if you finished up your food on the second day? Right.
So you're saying that holiness has to do somehow with like personal integrity?
Yeah, it's good way of saying it.
And how does that have? Yeah, okay. Anyone else want to? In other words, it's our own moral compass that we're sort of in charge of, basically. Nobody, even if people cannot be looking over our shoulders.
That would work with the ideas like it's something like let's say that Shabbat, like that's maybe the easiest for me to relate to, not that Beit HaMikdash, the Kedushat Azman, right? So and everybody can relate to that, no matter what we do on Shabbat, we have Shabbat as a separate day with separate feeling about it, separate Kedusha. So if the idea of the Kedusha is that it's supposed to radiate into the week, then that's the idea. That's the idea that I felt like you were bringing forth about Kedusha.
Right. So we have this example of Shabbat and how it's radiating forth into the week. Okay, yeah, for sure. What else do people?
It also seems that some of these things, like the wages of the laborer, that by doing this individual action that is moral, it radiates out into making it a more just society. So that's sort of
exactly
that Rabbi Poland's talking about.
For sure, right. A lot of these are about making a just society. In other words, by being holy, we are creating a just society. We are radiating bracha, especially to the people who most need it, right? Like the poor person, the stranger, the laborer who's, the day laborer. Like a lot of these are about what does it mean to create a just society, which I would add is also a holy society, right? Like, in some way. Yeah, anyone else want to add anything? Ita? Yeah.
I think I see it a little bit differently. I think most of these commandments are kind of public. You know, the thing of not mixing two threads in your garment. It's supposed to, it's a hook, right? Where you don't understand.
Yes, it's a folk. It's something that we don't understand. Yeah.
Right.
There's no obvious meaning. Why do you why can't you wear wool and cotton together? Right.
Right. But we do it and it's a public statement. So we kind of we wear by not wearing, we're making a personal choice that we don't understand, as an example. So for me, it's more like fake it till you make it kind of halakha, where you don't always understand and you don't always want to do the best thing, that you do it because that's the commandment. And by doing it in a public way, it creates, it kind of molds the psyche of in a moral compass. Because I mean, maybe I'm just cynical about people, but I don't know. But I actually like the idea of we can fall so easily and so quickly from a kind of moral high ground. But if we actually have the humility to say, you know, I need to go so much further, and I'm kind of I'm going to be guided by the halakha and by these commandments that I don't always understand, or that I don't always come from inside. It's another process, and there's a kind of sublimation, like the word sublimation kind of comes to mind, where you're saying this is larger than a kind of decision. But it has to be a decision.
Right. I think that's what's so interesting about this passage. There's on the one hand these like general principles that every religion would agree with and that we can rationally make so much sense, which is a lot of this passage. But on the other hand, there's also being holy is not only that, right? It's not only creating a just society, right? Though maybe this is also in some way, but it's also not mixing what kind of clothing you wear. It's also doing things we don't understand, right? It's also a way, right, of you shall be holy. Holiness also has an element of mystery, of things that we don't understand. It's not necessarily irrational, but non-rational, let's say, like that we don't, that we can't grasp why. Okay. We don't have...
So it's Maureen.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to try this out. So maybe the reason these chukim are kind of thrown in here, the ones that we don't know, like we'll understand in B'olam Haba or whatever when the Mashiach comes. Maybe it's saying, again, I feel a little cynical about humankind these days. Maybe it's saying that, like, that in a way you don't really understand these other things either. That really none of it is, all of it is beyond your understanding. And so when you kind of have a workaround so that I'm going to become a billionaire, but I'm also going to, then show my benevolence by, I don't know, trying to colonize Mars, to take a random example. That's like you've misunderstood these laws. I mean, he's not a Jewish guy, but he's a schmuck. But anyway, that these are not laws where you're supposed to try to find a workaround, or how, maybe I'll throw a few prutot to my workers, but I'm still going to take advantage of them, and maybe I'll leave a little something on the corners of the field, but I'm going to make my fields in such a way that I'm still the richest guy in the universe. So, but maybe this is saying, no, there are things here you don't understand. Don't try to think that you outsmart. To outsmart it, that know what the limits are, what you're supposed to do. Like, read these words and do these things.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to also what Ita was saying, the word humility, right? That's also having humility. When we read and internalize and try to build a life based on these things. Okay, I only have a few more minutes left. I wanted to look at Rabbi Sachs's. So Rabbi Sachs Jonathan Sachs, Alav Shalom, does talk about these specific rules. What are they doing here? And this is also a good summation in terms of the original theme of this class of relationships. At first glance, these laws have nothing to do with one another. Some are about conscience, some about politics and economics, and others about purity and taboo. Clearly, though, the Torah is telling us otherwise. They do have something in common. They are all about order, limits, boundaries. They are telling us that reality has a certain underlying structure whose integrity must be honored. If you hate or take revenge, you destroy relationships. If you commit injustice, you undermine the trust on which society depends. If you fail to respect the integrity of nature, right? So this is where it gets to this different seeds, species, and so on. And I would say probably add to it the one about the not wearing two different kinds of cloth together, shatnez, you take the first step down a path that ends in environmental disaster. Well, maybe shatnez doesn't lead to environmental disaster, but it's still about this order. There is an order to the universe, part moral, part political, part ecological. When that order is violated, eventually there is chaos. When that order is observed and preserved, we become co-creators of the sacred harmony and integrated diversity that the Torah calls holy. Why then is it specifically in this chapter that the two great commands, love the neighbor and the stranger, appear? The answer is profound and very far from obvious, because this is where love belongs in an ordered universe. Clear rules and proper discipline help to establish, maintain, and expand order for more fulfilled children, families, and society. Love is not enough. Relationships need rules. So I thought this was a fascinating interpretation of this passage. In other words, that this passage is all about order. Even the things that are harder to understand, like the wearing two different kinds of cloth, it's all about making order, and that this order is ultimately where love belongs. In other words, this order is sort of like the basis for the commandment of love that's here. Here, there's in this passage we see love your neighbor as yourself. Later on, there's also later on in the parsha, there's also the command about loving the stranger, which is even in some ways more difficult. So in other words, they need so the rules are the basis that enables the love. So I thought that was a very interesting way of looking at this passage. Just a couple more things, and then I'm going to wrap up, and I'll leave time for questions. The people who are in charge of this order are the Levites, which is over here. I'm going to read this one too, because I don't want to miss it. The one that we did not get to, this question of the peace offerings, and why do we have to eat them in a certain time, in a certain place? What is going on here? So Rabbi Hirsch, I really like this. And this is also connected. It is most significant that the meal of peace offerings and the related laws concerning what to do with what is left over and thing, i.e. the prohibition against eating any leftover on the third day, which by the way goes back to what we were talking about before about the holiness of the leftovers, and we talked about in previous classes, are discussed as the third fundamental law at the very outset of the chapter on holiness. This shows most clearly that in Judaism, the sanctity of life is just as remote from mortification of the flesh as it is from unrestrained self-abandonment to physical appetites. Right? So that also goes back to the Ramban. In other words, like sanctifying life does not mean that we don't enjoy this world, but it also doesn't mean that we are drinking everything, that we're drunkards and whatever words that gluttons. Meal of peace offerings, the spiritualization and moralization of our spiritual pleasures, so that even the everyday table of our happy, joyous family life becomes an altar of God, and we ourselves turn our eyes to God even when we eat. Such is the blossom of the Jewish sanctification of personal life, which in turn, if genuine, must immediately yield as its fruits in communal life, the fulfillment of our duty to love our fellow men as our brothers. So in other words, we start with the family life that also Rabbi Sachs is talking about, like the rules and order and love that makes a joyous family life. And then like we radiate outward, also like a bit like Rabbi Poland was talking about. We start with the family life, and then that's the basis, sanctifying the family life, including like the very physical things we do in our family life, like eating, is the basis for loving our fellow man as our brother and like ultimately building a just society. I know this is like a lot all at once, but since it's the end, I'm just to put it all out there. I just wanted to end with what Donna began with at the beginning of what is this idea that Kedoshim is a process, right? And obviously, if we go according to this direction of what does it mean to be holy, of like setting something aside in order to like radiate outwards goodness and blessing, then that's a process, and that's something that only human beings can do. So Or HaChaim talks about Kedoshim Tiyu in the future sense, the future tense, where he says you shall become holy, because we're never actually going to become holy. That's only the angels, like we saw at the beginning, that they're all holy, but it's always this process. And we'll end up with Aviva Zornberg, who says, Kedusha can be understood as the aspiration towards such vitality. A kind of discomfort is its baseline, a restlessness about all given situations. Here, one is not yet who one wishes to be. One seeks out a deeper and larger way to be. In other words, like Kedusha is about aspiring to be something better, and aspiring also to, I would add, to send that blessing outwards. So it is now 10 o'clock. I'm going to officially end here. I want to thank everybody for coming and for offering all of your insights. And it's really been a huge pleasure and privilege for me to learn with all of you from all over the world and from all different parts of my life. And it's been amazing. So I want to thank everyone for that. And yeah, and I'll leave open for questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel.
You're welcome.
Thanks,
you,
Rachel.
Thank you.
Sorry I couldn't be here earlier. Had a technician unexpectedly drop in to do a repair. So,
that's okay. We got the end at least.
Yeah, I'll have to catch it in the recording.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah. If anyone has any questions, I know that was like a lot at the end there. A lot of deep sources all at once. Yeah.
Looks like Donna has a question. Donna, go ahead.
Go ahead, Donna.
I'm just thinking though, everyone's own personal definition of order is exactly what causes so much disorder in our society. I won't mention the particular topics, but I don't want to get into them, but I'm thinking that because we have many arguments about what that means, and it becomes very, almost sometimes violent. So let's hope for peace. That's
right. I think it's also important to point out, and we spoke about this in other classes, that like as much as Leviticus Vayikra is a book of order, it also recognizes the fact that we can never really, impose order on everything. And there's always, like we spoke about that a few classes about, that there's always chaos also. Like, in other words, life is not all in order. It doesn't work that way. And that's also very important in Vayikra, that the rules don't cover everything. The order doesn't cover everything. Order is not everywhere. There's always going to be chaos. There's always going to be cases that the rules don't cover. There's always going to be disagreement. And that's also an important message in Vayikra.
Yeah.
I put Chai on mute because I think that was a side conversation. Okay, so thank you so much, Rachel. One of my favorite parts was to meet your family too. So fun to see all the loving family come, and all the other students that loved your class. Amazing. Like I told you before, one of my favorites. And yeah, thank you so much. Today was the last class, unfortunately, but hopefully there'll be more in other sessions. We're getting into our home stretch in general ahead of Shavuot, and we'll have many classes happen after the holiday. You can learn about these classes at drisha.org. And thank you, Rachel, again, and everyone who joined us.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Lehitraot.
Thank you very much.